The Nasdaq Composite is a stock market index of the common stocks and similar securities listed on the Nasdaq stock market, meaning that it has over 3,000 components. It is highly followed in the U.S. as an indicator of the performance of stocks of technology companies and growth companies. Since both U.S. and non-U.S. companies are listed on the Nasdaq stock market, the index is not exclusively a U.S. index. History: the index was launched in 1971, with a starting value of 100. Price history: it broke 200 in 1980. It first broke 500 in 1991. Dot-com boom and bust. On July 17, 1995, the index closed above the 1,000 mark for the first time. It made steady gains in the following years to reach 2,000 points by 1998, then began to accelerate significantly. This process mushroomed in late 1999 amid concerns that businesses would require massive technology replacement to achieve Y2K compatibility, allowing the index to close that year at 4,069.31 points. On March 10, 2000, the index finally peaked at an intraday high of 5,132.52, and closed at an all-time high of 5,048.62. The decline from this peak signaled the beginning of the dot-com bubble burst. The index declined to half its value within a year, and finally hit the bottom of the bear market trend on October 10, 2002, with an intraday low of 1,108.49. While the index gradually recovered since then, it did not trade for more than half of its peak value until May 2007. The 2000s brought a mix of pessimistic news stemming from the early 2000s recession, the September 11 attacks and the impending Afghan war, along with the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Financial crisis and aftermath: the index opened the fourth quarter of 2007 with new 80-month highs, closing above the 2,800-point mark on October 9, 2007, and reaching an intraday level of 2,861.51 on October 31, 2007, the highest point reached on the index since January 24, 2001. High energy prices and the possibility of recession dropped the Nasdaq into a bear market in early 2008, which was recognized on February 6 when the Nasdaq closed below the 2,300 level, about 20% below the recent highs. Furthermore, the failure of Lehman Brothers in September brought world financial markets into turmoil. The Nasdaq was no exception, experiencing record levels of market volatility. On September 29, 2008, the Nasdaq dropped nearly 200 points, the most since the tech bubble burst, losing 9.14% to fall beneath the 2,000 level. Conversely, on October 13, 2008, the Nasdaq recorded a gain of nearly 200 points. On March 9, 2009, the composite hit a 6-year intraday low of 1,265.52 before recovering under the influence of Federal Reserve quantitative easing. Amid hope that the Great Recession, the United States housing bubble and the global financial crisis of 2008–2009 were easing and possibly coming to an end, the Nasdaq established a volatile base from which the index would finally surpass the 3,000 mark, and the initial crash low of mid-2000, for the first time since the end of the 20th century. This first occurred intraday on February 29, 2012, before further volatile pullbacks. In 2012, the index managed a yearly close above 3,000 for only the second time in its history, with a total of 3,019.51 points. With the extension of relatively low tax rates for most incomes, the index jumped to begin 2013 with only minor pullbacks. On November 26, 2013, the index made its first close above 4,000 since September 7, 2000. Although it still stood almost 20% below its all-time highs, the index did set a new record annual close of 4,176.59 on December 31, 2013. Criteria: to be eligible for inclusion in the composite, a security's U.S. listing must be exclusively on the Nasdaq stock market, and must be one of the following security types: American depository receipts, common stock, limited partnership interests, ordinary shares, real estate investment trusts, shares of beneficial interest, tracking stocks, closed-end funds, convertible debentures, exchange-traded funds, preferred stocks, rights, warrants, units and other derivative securities are not included. If at any time a component security no longer meets the above criteria, the security becomes ineligible for inclusion in the composite index and is removed. Investing in the Nasdaq Composite Index is currently made accessible through an exchange-traded fund issued by fund manager Fidelity Investments. Introduced on October 1, 2003, the ETF attempts to match the overall performance of the index. It is not nearly as popular as the cubes, which track the Nasdaq 100. See also, closing milestones of the Nasdaq Composite, New York Stock Exchange Composite, Value Line Composite Index, references. Nasdaq Composite Index, external links, Reuters page for IXIC, Yahoo! Finance page for IXIC, Bloomberg page for CCMP, IND, Nasdaq Market Indices, Nasdaq Composite Index List, March 10, 2000, record high.